it summed up wherever God's working, that's where you need to move. Because I was trying to make stuff happen that God wasn't in yet. Then God was doing a work over here. And he reminded me to go after the ones that God's working on, who's ready to respond. And from there, our ministry exploded.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Kentucky Farm Bureau Insurance of Martin County. Beyond just providing insurance, they are dedicated to protecting our local families from difficult financial situations when life happens. We want to thank them for everything they do for our community and for supporting our mission to be a resource for youth workers and the families they serve. To learn more, please visit the team at your local Martin County office or call 606-298-7721.
What if your purpose isn't just to make a living, but to actually change lives for eternity? Today's guest has spent over a decade in youth ministry and is now a lead pastor in Central Appalachia. He is helping his congregation not only discover hope, faith, and purpose, but doing so right where they are. Today's guest is also not afraid to think out of the box, even if it involves bringing puppets into his church. Do you think you know who it is? Let's get into the episode and find out. Welcome to Me and Poverty, a podcast about breaking barriers, building bridges, and changing lives, one story at a time. Today's guest is a new friend of mine. I've always heard his name around town, and I've heard some of his messages. He is a full-time pastor now, spent a decade in youth ministry, and we met over Mexican food. That's right. You know these pastors, like they want to get to know you a little bit. They're going to break bread. And I was honored to sit down with my new friend and get to know him and his story. Found out he's actually from our same hometown, so that was great to get to know a little more about. I wanted him to come on the show today, and he might have been a little reluctant. I don't know, but I'm glad he's here. And I wanted him to come on the show to talk a little bit about, hey, what is it like to be in full-time ministry? Like, we've got some young people out there that may want to go down this path, and they're feeling called to, and they're not sure how to answer that call or what does it really look like. So I wanted today's guest to talk about some of maybe what are the challenges or what are the big wins to being in full-time ministry to answer that call to go into full-time ministry. With that being said, welcome to the show, my new friend, Pastor Dwayne Raines.
Hey, Joe. Pleasure being here today, and I just thank you so much for this invitation, and looking forward to talking to you today.
I appreciate that, and it's so good to have you on here, man, and I know your heart, and it's so cool to get to talk to somebody that's had your experience, you know, getting that start in youth ministry and learning and growing from that to now being a full-time lead pastor. So I've got to ask, I ask everyone this to start the show. The name of this podcast is Me and Poverty. Pastor Dwayne, what would you say is your relationship to poverty?
Well, Joe, being from Eastern Kentucky, I've obviously was raised around it. I did not necessarily live that type of life. My father was a committed coal miner, worked 6-7 days a week. Unfortunately, when the coal business started going under around Eastern Kentucky, we had to pack up and move to West Virginia. And then I really didn't get around poverty a whole lot again until I got into ministry and youth ministry specifically in Southern Ohio. So I dealt with a lot of kids struggling through that, and I've seen the effects that it had on them.
I know from my current experience the last few years, really, and, I've had different roles over the years, but I've learned serving in ministry, youth ministry, specifically our teen Sunday school class and our youth nights. You see what families really look like. You see their home. When you're driving the van, you hear the stories. So I'm excited to maybe hear some of those today from you, if you could. And I think you're going to offer some great perspective to our audience today. When did you first feel the call to ministry? How did you end up there, Dwayne?
Well, it's funny you should ask that, Joe. It actually started right there in Martin County. I was about 22 years old, and I was going to Inez First Baptist, where Paul Schmidt was pastoring. and I started feeling a calling to minister, but I'm scared of public speaking. To this day, I'm terrified of it. And I was like, Lord, you're crazy. So I ran for years. Finally, after I got married, my wife could see the call in my heart, and she could see it in my life. And the Lord really just started working on me. And to make a long story short, I finally submitted to that call, and I applied for a youth pastor position in Southern Ohio at my wife's home church. It was a bivocational thing at first, and I said, all right, Lord, here I am. I'm tired of running. Use me the way you want me to be used, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it's funny how there's a lot of biblical examples that we could look at, if you know those, I'm sure, but of people that just, kind of fight what they're told to do. And I think a lot of us are guilty of that. And but it's funny how God will use certain people, like a wife, to speak to our hearts, right? So
if you don't mind, I'd like to touch on something. Another thing about that story is it's amazing that, the devil fights you when you're running at first, but once you submit to the Lord, not only do you receive joy because you're in the center of the God's will, but he actually changes your perspective. And so, what I was dreading to do for so long, running for so long, I was now excited to do once I said yes to the Lord's calling. And that's very interesting. It kind of goes back to your first opening line there, because I remember I was so on fire for the Lord when I first accepted that call that I didn't want to do it part-time. I wanted to do it full-time right off the bat. And I remember I was a little bit frustrated that the Lord didn't open that door. But what did happen was he put me in a secular job as a social worker during that time. And that was so beneficial because I got to, just like you said, I got to get inside these kids' homes and see how they were actually living. And so, it was just a reminder that God knows what's best. It's in his timing, and he will prepare our hearts in untraditional ways to get us ready for the plan he has for us.
That's awesome. I'm glad you threw that in. And I think it's summed up, and you and I may have talked about this, I can't remember, but it's a classic example of he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the called. And I think oftentimes he'll allow us to crawl before we run, thankfully. And it sounds like that's probably what he did with you and got you ready. And there's a natural progression oftentimes I see with that. And it's healthy and it's good for the impact that you're going to make long term, I think, in ministry. So let's pretend you got a young person in front of you, Pastor Dwayne, and they are feeling called to the ministry, but they're not sure what to do next. Would you have any advice for them today?
Oh, absolutely. I've actually encountered this quite a few times with youth ministry. First and foremost, I ask them to pray. You need to pray. The Lord tells us to seek wisdom from him, and he'll give it to us. They need to seek him with a pure heart. I would also encourage them to seek counsel of other mature believers. That was one thing, one individual that had came to me over this issue about, I feel called, just don't know what to do. I could actually see the call in his life, and I think by him coming to me and me identifying some things that God was showing me gave him the confidence that he was doing the right thing. So definitely pray, definitely seek wise counsel from elders, and most importantly, just be determined not to run, but to be obedient to what the Lord's calling you to do.
When you're talking about seeking wise counsel, my mind automatically went to Proverbs. And I had one of my mentors that we sat down and we did a pretty in-depth study in Proverbs, and talks about seeking wise counsel and that sort of thing. So that's great advice. And it's a great first step, to be frank. And I think it's going to set them up. So I appreciate that. I hope you're enjoying this episode of Me in Poverty. I just wanted to take a quick second and tell you about our Season 2 sponsor, Appalachia Reach Out, or ARO for short. Founded in 1972, ARO is a ministry in Eastern Kentucky devoting their time and effort to being Christ's love in action. Based in Martin County, but also serving Perry County, Kentucky, and Scioto County, Ohio, ARO supports families by meeting basic needs through their food pantry, their thrift store, while also partnering in addiction recovery, education, and community development through their work and witness teams. Fun fact, we've even had Appalachia Reach Out's Executive Director, Dwayne Mills, on this podcast before. So please go check out that episode last season. I'm going to have a link to ARO's website in the description of this video.
guys, I'm sure they would love your support, whether that be financially or volunteering your time. With that being said, let's get back into the episode. What would you say are maybe some of the misconceptions about being in full-time ministry?
Well, I think probably the biggest misconception is that we only work on Sundays. And I'm guilty to even have thought that when I was their age, that, you just see the pastor on Sunday and on Wednesday night, and that's about it. But there's just so much more to it. You're
Sure.
always on the clock. That's something that I would warn them about and make sure that they are mentally prepared for that. There's no off switch in ministry.
Yeah.
I've had calls at 12, 1 o'clock in the morning, 2 o'clock in the morning, during the day, on my days off, been on vacation. That's just part of it. So they need to be flexible for ministry, because it's a calling. It's more than a job. It's a calling.
We have a bus ministry at our church, and I kind of took on just organizing that, and I'll drive occasionally as well. But it's funny to me, he just sets the perfect servant's heart example. Our pastor. And I don't know if he wants me to mention him on here, but, when someone will send the text group, hey, I can't drive tonight, or can someone take my spot? He's always the first one to jump in. And I'm like, man, that's a stinking pastor. Like, they're going to be out till 9:30 at night. He's bivocational. And I'm like, geez, man, it's a lot. I don't have that misconception, but I've been blessed to see the inside view, right? A little bit. So, I thought that a lot growing up as well.
Kudos to van ministry workers. I have a heart for the van ministry. As a little boy, I rode with my father, and as he would go up these hollers picking up kids, it was instilled in me. And I'll be honest with you, Joe, it was the number one thing that helped us, our youth ministry, thrive in Southern Ohio, was a van ministry. So I know the time it takes, the dedication, the commitment, and I'm thoroughly thankful and blessed for those who dedicated their life to that.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, we're down to one bus right now, but occasionally our ministry, we'll have to make 3 bus runs, right? In our little county, our haulers, for anybody that watches this and it's not from Eastern Kentucky, it's a little hard to understand, right? But, it can be a lot, and it's so rewarding too, man. And you get to connect, and you get to have those conversations when you and I are going through the haulers with our kids, and you get to tell them how much you care and invest in them. So it's a lot of work, but it's so rewarding. It's great. Let's do a funny question. Do you remember your first sermon, and were you nervous?
Was I nervous? Now, you're talking about the man who ran for years. And yes, I was nervous. And I'm talking about my adult sermon. I did some preaching to the youth, and I was getting comfortable with that. And I was working my bivocational job there as a social worker. And the pastor called me and said, hey, I'm going to be on vacation. Do you care to preach for me Sunday night? And I said, nope, don't think I can make it. And I hung up. And as I went to my break, the Lord was working on me. He said, yeah, I called you to this, son. You need to do this. So I went and called him back. Said, John, put me down. I said, I'll do it. And so, I remember preaching my first sermon. I was a nervous wreck, but the Lord worked it out. And as nervous as I was, the comments afterwards, people telling me that they could not believe that was my first time ever preaching, was further confirmation that I was doing what God told me to do. So I thank God for that. And it's a reminder that sometimes we got to do scary situations to remind us who's really in control, and it's God, not us. And my experience.
It's always great when God gives you those little gifts of confirmation, right? I watched a video recently, and it said something about it was talking about discipline, and buddy, I'm a work in progress. Sheesh, I'm working on my discipline all the time. But it talked about doing what you know you need to be doing repeatedly without ever getting confirmation of it. I'm like, like being willing to do that, that's discipline. And I'm like, daggone it, man, that's so true, and it's hard. And so it's good when you do get those little confirmations. And I'm sure it wasn't an accident that I came across that video recently. If you could give youth pastor Dwayne any freshman advice, what would it be?
If I could go back and start all over, what would I do differently, type of thing? Kind of. Well, I would prepare myself the importance of being thankful to your workers. Not that I wasn't, but I think I could have done a better job showing my thanks towards a lot of the helpers, the volunteer help. A lot of times you just get in a rhythm and you forget that that's the backbone. I tried to do things to show my appreciation, but I could have done more. That would probably be the first thing. Another thing would be probably make sure you do not neglect your family. And not that we had any issues or nothing like that, but looking back, there was a lot of things that I could have done differently that got my family either more involved or said no in areas that I should have said no. So I could have had time with my little girl and my wife. Those would be the two things right there.
I talk about my life's mission in my book, and that's to eliminate poverty in Appalachia while honoring my family. And we're all guilty of it, man. I strategically, for myself, when I went through the process of developing out a life's mission plan. Hindsight's 2020, of course, right? So I'm trying to hit the ground as a solopreneur now, kind of trying to, and as I've navigated my way into my calling, I'm trying to keep that at the forefront. So I'll be in prayer, you be in prayer for me, and I'll be in prayer for you for continuing to do that. So you've spent over a decade, I believe you said, in youth ministry. How does that prepare someone to be a lead pastor?
You got to learn to love people. That's the key to being a good pastor, I feel, is, of course, loving the Lord with all your heart, but also loving those He's entrusted you with. And, that was probably the number one thing that helped me is because, kids will try your patience, especially teenagers, the ones that we dealt with, love them to death, but they came from broken homes, from a lot of unstructure and dysfunction. And so with that being said, being patient with them as they grew, I did not realize how you still got to show that same patience with adults as well. And the only thing I had to do was look in the mirror and see how patient God's been with me, but I was blinded by that. That would be the thing. God, looking back, He prepared me to not only people be patient with people, but how to communicate with people in a way that they would understand. And so, working with youth ministry, I always tried to think of sermon illustrations that they could relate to. And now I'm doing the same thing, but on an adult level. So those were the things that God helped me with that experience.
Yeah, I could see every bit of that being true. And it's great advice, even for me. Would you say there's a weight to being in full-time ministry, to have a leadership role in ministry? And does it change drastically when you go from like youth ministry to being a lead pastor? Is there a weight still? Does it feel different than before?
Well, it definitely feels different, but when you really break it down and look at what your responsibility is, it's the same thing with just a different audience. And I was very thankful for the wise congregation that I have here at Allen Baptist, that, they saw the anxiety on me when I first came. It was obvious. I'm an anxious person. And, they pulled me off to the side at times. They said, son, we're just big kids. Just treat us like you do the kids. And there's a lot of truth to that. It's the same thing. We all need Jesus. I just got to find a way to communicate it where they can understand. And not only communicate it, but show it and how I treat them. Not much difference.
And it's good. The concept of a church family, for me, growing up, I didn't really experience a ton of that. I mean, and maybe that was partially on my fault, being one of those kiddos, I don't know, that come from the broken home and all that. But now, I mean, buddy, our church, we eat together, we travel together, we play card games together, and there's a level of honesty that comes up. It's a huge blessing, man. And I wish I experienced that so much sooner in life. I came to our church when I was about 17, I want to say. And of course, my wife and I, similar to you all, we moved around a little bit and got to come back home. And that was the one thing for us is our church family is everything. And we have experienced having them and then not having them. And oh my gosh, man, life is just so much better when you have good church family to lean on. So it's cool that you had some good moments early with your church.
Well, hey, we're not meant to do this world alone. That's why He gave us the church, to be unified and go forward together. So, amen.
Any tips when it comes to playing? And I hate kind of saying this because when you get saved and even when you go into ministry, I mean, I talk about this sometimes is, in life, we play a balancing act. We spin a lot of plates. But of course, when it comes to our relationship with Christ, it's all in, right? Like you're fully committed. We die to ourselves and and we carry our cross. But any tips for playing that balancing game, if I may say that, of family, of pastoring, of ministering, and your personal life? I mean, any tips there, or can you talk a little bit about that?
I was reminded when I first got into this by a dear friend of mine. This is before I started youth ministry. He said, God ordained the family before he did the church. And you need to make sure your family, God's first, then your family, then your church. And so there's a lot of truth to that, and it's true because, the qualification of a pastor, they have their home in a good order. So if your family health is not good, the church won't benefit either. I make sure now, as I've learned over the years, to learn to say no to things I need to say no to, that is not of utmost importance, something that maybe learn to delegate a little bit. Do I have a deacon that can take care of this issue? Do we got another Sunday school teacher that can cover this or whatever? I make sure I go to the ball games. I make sure I spend time with my family, and that's how we balance. But on the flip side of that, I make sure my family is also involved in ministry. They're involved with several things here at the church, from VBS to drive-through nativities and Operation Shoebox. You got to balance it by incorporating it together, if that makes sense what I'm saying.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I haven't heard that latter part that you said, but I've got to make sure my family's part of the ministry. Like, yeah. Because if you're all rowing the same way, you're not going to crash into each other all the time.
I'm leading them like I am the church. And so I've got to show them what it's like to serve the Lord, and they got to have some hands-on experience as well. So we minister together.
Yeah, and I get that. It's just actually putting words behind it is very good. I like that a lot. You got a funny story of maybe a little of a youth trip you did where you take the kids out, something funny happened or embarrassing maybe for you or them, or anything like that?
Well, I'm trying to think. I know there has been, but that was been a couple of years ago. I don't remember a whole lot, but the one that just keeps popping in my mind is we was out passing out flyers for our drama that we was about to do, our Easter drama that the kids put on. And I had a mean streak hit me. I had this girl that, she believed everything, and we pulled into Advanced Auto to pass out flyers. And she said, Dwayne, I'll go in here and take care of this. I said, well, good. I said, I need you to do me a favor. I said, go in there and tell them that, or my turn signal fluid's out, and it won't blink no more. And I need to get about a gallon of that. And she ran it back, and I said, yes, that's right. So she went in, and me and the other boys were sitting there in the truck just dying laughing. And as I watched her explain and doing the little signal, and that guy just shaking his head, yeah, we had fun with that. So, but yeah, we'd pick on each other and do little practical jokes. We had fun.
Yeah, and you create that family atmosphere. That's just you sitting on the couch at Thanksgiving. That's what that is, but in a youth ministry setting. So,
well, it shows genuineness to the kids. They relate to you. They know you're human just like them, and it actually builds trust with them. Even though that was a dishonest thing to do by putting her up for that, but she knew that I cared enough about to joke with her, and have fun. So,
do you ever miss the chaos of lock-ins or youth retreats or whatever activities that you all did, just the pure chaos? Do you miss that?
Not yet. No, I do miss some of the events we did. I don't miss the lock-ins. The lock-ins are rough.
Gosh, they're oh man, I've did quite a few and they are rough.
Lock-ins are rough. I kind of mastered that towards the end of my ministry. I figured it out. You want to know the secret? Yeah, here's the secret.
What you got? Give me the wisdom, brother.
Here's what you do. You let them go crazy from 6 o'clock to about 2 or 3. When you start seeing the first one get a little bit sleepy, you gather everybody in the room for a movie from 2 to 4. About 15 minutes into the movie, all thing you hear is snoring, and then you can just sit there and relax until time to get them up and send them home. I figured that out about year 7.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm going to keep that one in mind. I'm the guy like playing ball at 4 a.m. with them. Like I'm that dummy, and then I'm paying for it for 3 days. What's the most rewarding part about being in full-time ministry for you?
The most rewarding part is obviously number one is seeing someone give their heart to the Lord. I never get over that. Leading someone to the Lord, just seeing them saved, seeing that guilt be removed, seeing that shame be removed, and their eyes light up. And as far as the youth ministry goes, the greatest joy looking back is knowing the impact that God allowed me to have on them, even to this day. When the Charlie Kirk thing happened here a few months ago, I had a young lady reach out to us that hadn't heard from in a couple of years, but that incident caught her attention and reminded her that she needs to be in church. And she remembered the impact that we had on her, how God used us in her life. And a matter of fact, Joe, she drove 2.5 hours down that next Sunday just to worship with us. And so knowing that God used us to have that type of impact on a young person, it's just a great joy. Who am I? I'm nothing,
That's right.
And to know that God will allow me in on his work, it's rewarding.
I literally just spoke at an event this morning. I looked over at the crowd and I said, I'm just a nobody. I'm nobody special, trying to tell everybody about somebody. Let's get a little more specific. What is maybe one specific challenge that pastors face that people might not know about?
A specific challenge that pastors face. I'm going to say, for me, what I've struggled with is learning to say no, that it's okay to say no.
Oh, buddy, I could talk about this for quite a while. From not a pastor's perspective, but somebody that sees a pastor that doesn't want to say no. They feel like they can't say no because they've been let down. Oh, man, we could talk about that for days,
That would, to me, because you got this burden, this calling to not only love on this church, lead this church and be there for them, and maybe not necessarily the church. You've also got your other brothers and sisters from sister churches trying to do stuff. And, sometimes if you're not careful and don't learn to say no, I fall right back into that trap that I talked about before, neglecting my family. So to me, I struggle sometimes with that.
I think
'cause
that
I don't want to let others down, and I don't want to let my family down too.
I think that leads really well into my next question. How do some of maybe your pastor friends deal with the potential burnout, discouragement? How do y'all deal with that?
Joe, is I actually just did this a couple months ago. I took some time and took the family, and we just got away for a few days. We went down to Gatlinburg, talked to some deacons, said, hey, I need you all to take care of the day today. If something big happens, call me. You just kind of got to do that from time to time. You got to get away. In addition to that, you got to pray. Pray for strength. I have to pray. I prayed that prayer not too long ago. Lord, give me the endurance. I'm wore out. I'm tired. I need some clarity. I need some wisdom. I need some strength. So isolating yourself from time to time to refresh, praying, feeding your own soul. And sometimes I'm used to preaching to everybody, but you got to be preached at yourself too. You got to examine yourself. You got to let the Lord feed you and rest in that.
I think there's just this big misconception that pastors have it all together. They got the direct connection, But I've heard some staggering statistics about pastors stepping away and different reasons for that. And so that is great advice. You got to make sure your own cup's filled, Let's be honest. You have your favorite potluck dinner dish, don't you? What is it? What is it? And you don't have to say who made it. I'm not trying to break up the church. I'm not trying to do that. We're not here to do that on this podcast, man. I just want to know. Like mine, it was always chicken dumplings. Like growing up,
you just took it. You just
took it. Come on,
you just took it.
Yeah. Are you the flat dumpling guy, or are you drop dumpling, the big
drop dumplings? Yep.
See
now in Ohio, a little different culture here. They call it chicken noodles. Okay, It's the same thing. It tastes the exact same, but instead of having that nice fat plump dumpling that we all like, it was big long skinny noodle. So
I got you.
But it was okay, but it wasn't nothing like my Eastern Kentucky chicken and dumplings.
Yeah, my grandmother, man, she makes the big plump, fluffy drop dumplings, and dude, I could eat my weight in those things. So I can relate to you. If you could preach anywhere in the world, like you get asked to come preach, and you get to stay maybe a day before, a day after, that sort of thing, where's your dream place to go preach one day?
Well, now I'm serious. I ain't just saying this. I'm there. Eastern Kentucky. Honestly, I prayed for the opportunity to get to come back home and to minister like he used me in Ohio. So this is my dream right here, where I'm at today in Eastern Kentucky.
I can see it. and it makes total sense. And
There's no other place I'd rather be.
that's awesome. And it's hard to sit and pray for something, God give it to you, and then you just like turn your back on it, you know. So
I hate to say this, Joe, but I prayed it, but never thought it would happen because I just thought my days in the mountains were over. God's like, I'll show you how big I am. I can make anything happen, and it did.
that's encouraging. That's encouraging to me. Well, and here I am. I mean, I'm getting to branch out all throughout Appalachia. Well, even central Kentucky, and I've had a few talks with people in the Bowling Green area and that sort of thing as well. But this is my home base, and I'm so proud of that. And I get to make easy investments here. It's too cool, man. So I can relate is my point. Are there certain qualities that you would recommend to a young person to start developing now if they think they might want to go into full-time ministry? And you've touched on some of those already. I don't want to take away from that, but is there anything standing out to you?
We've talked about the spiritual disciplines, obviously,
Yep.
about reading their Bibles and praying,
Yep.
seeking the Lord's will. But I would also say learn to listen more than speak. The Bible tells us to be quick to listen, slow to speak, right? And I think a lot of times we get ahead of ourselves and we say too much. And it would pay us dividends to listen more. And I've learned that a lot, especially in the lead pastor, that sometimes it's good to sit back and just listen for a while. And not only listen to your surroundings, but most importantly, listen for God's direction.
It's good advice even in business corporate world, I think. Because in my younger days, I learned a few hard lessons. And if I had subscribed, I think it's a good word to use, if I had subscribed more to that, and I knew it, I knew better, but it's easy to get caught up, right? And we lean on our own understanding.
And I'll tell you something else to do. Advice I'd give them is learn that you're not always going to get it your way. Even no matter what position you have, learn to adapt to others. Does that make sense what I'm saying? Uh, you know, God might be calling me to do something, but he might have a different way of doing it than what I see fit, and vice versa with those you're leading. They need to learn that as well. Learn to be humble, and we don't all know it all. Just a piece of the puzzle.
That's for sure. Let's say you got some youth that want to get involved now. Maybe they're still in high school, that sort of thing, or college. What advice would you have to them? Maybe they're not like seeking out full-time ministry as a pastor, but they just want to get involved with the local church. What advice would you have for them?
Well, the first thing I try to do is find out what interests them. I've had over the years, I found out talking about those long bus rides, I discovered some girls that could sing, and they were singing songs that really wasn't glorifying God. So we started having conversations about that. And next thing I know, we had a praise band. Started talking to kids who had a high interest in bands and computers, but didn't really have the gift of singing. But guess what? We taught them how to use a soundboard, and we taught them how to help with that. Kids who enjoyed praying, we called on them to pray during services. Kids give their testimonies. We would just kind of find what interests them, where God was moving, and then kind of point them in that direction, and then jump behind them and support them every step of the way. So just seeking out their gifts, I guess, would be the big thing first.
That's awesome. And I love those moments when God uses, you mentioned singing maybe some particular songs that don't necessarily glorify God. First of all, two things. I go back to thinking about a conversation I overheard just a few weeks ago on our bus, and I'm like, yeah, guys, maybe we shouldn't be, talking about that. Let's talk about something like, anyway, so that is definitely, that happens quite a bit, but I love those moments where God takes somebody that's got a past, man, they got the testimony, and he puts his spin on their experiences or their talents, their gifts, and he uses it for his glory, dude. I love those moments. And there's a song I was listening to the other day, and it talked about, I forget the lyrics exactly how they went, but it talks about the rebels in the church had a story till they read the red letters, something like that. And I'm like, okay, that's it. Yep. So I love those moments. I love seeing it because I'm like, God, you're in control. Like, you gave purpose to it all. Like, it's cool seeing those moments.
And with that being said, I think it's so important. I mean, look what's going on at Hager Hill right now. You got all this this youth. I mean, it all started with these youth, and I think it's important that the older generation not only help these youth find their callings, but get behind them and encourage them every step of the way, mentor them. You can correct them out of love in a loving way without being condescending.
My next question is, what role does mentorship play in preparing people for ministry?
Oh, it's huge. We send a lot of kids. Well, God called a lot of kids. Let me put it that way. God called a lot of kids into ministry during our youth tenure. And one thing I always like to do, I remember the first one specifically, wanted him to exercise that calling a little bit. And so, I helped him write his first sermon. And by doing so, but anyways, in doing so, we prayed over, where's the Lord leading you to preach out of? We sat down and I showed him how to write a sermon. He wrote it. I showed him how to do the research. And then we let him practice that with me, get repetitions in. And that's important with mentorship, not just telling them what to do, but getting in there and doing it with them. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I can tell somebody all day long and point fingers, but if I'm in the ditches with them and showing them, that goes such a long way. And I learned that from my father. I worked for him for many years in the mines, and that was one thing that the guys really respected about him was when the issues arised in the plant. He just didn't tell them what to do. He laced his boots up and got in there and worked with them and showed them. And I learned that's a mentor right there. They show you the way. So it's very important as Christian leaders, whether you hold a title or not. We're still leading this younger generation. Don't just tell them what they should do. Show them what they should do by doing it with them.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. And I think also of some biblical examples of that, right? We've got some duos and even trios in the Bible when you're looking at Paul and Timothy and others. And that's, great way to put it. What would you say to a young person who is considering ministry, but they don't believe they're good enough, or they feel like their past is going to hold them back? Or I think I know what you're going to say, but for our audience, what would you say to that?
Say what I tell the ones I've heard this before and what I tell myself. I think of Moses. Moses killed a man. Moses had a speech impediment. And yet God used him in a mighty way. I look at David. He committed some grievous sins after God was already using, but still God wasn't done with him, continued to use him. Look at Jonah. Jonah ran for many years, but God still used him. None of us are perfect. It is not about what we do. It's what Christ can do through us. And so I try to encourage them with that and give them biblical examples.
And it's all part of it. I think God strategically uses people based on their past oftentimes, right? And in a way, that is a way of prepping them. And we don't even know it. And it's just how he works, man. It's really cool.
There's only one perfect person he called, and that was Jesus Christ. And so that's what we got to remember. Every one of them guys and gals in the Bible had a past. And they need to realize that, because he's going to send them lives. Satan's job is to stop the gospel, stop it from spreading. And that's one way he does that, by discouraging young leaders.
Instilling fear and doubts. Yeah. So if you were to create the new pastor starter pack, like if you were to make a new pastor, maybe like a little care package to send them, what's in that based on your experience?
What would be in that? Well, they already should have a Bible, but I'd send them a prayer journal. I would encourage them, and this is something I'm trying to do better on, is writing down their thoughts, writing down achievements, and writing down failures, and areas that they need to work on, and maybe just log the progress. I would send that, and I would probably send them some trustworthy, mentored pastors that they could listen to, to be fed. I love listening to David Jeremiah, Charles Stanley, Adrian Rogers. You got to be careful who you listen to. And I would give them people that I trust, because like I said earlier, we got to be fed too. And that would probably be in my starter pack.
I like it. I like it a lot. And I go back to my days in college getting my undergrad degree, and our pastor would send us care packages. That would just kind of keep us going, right? It was fuel for our fire on those lonely, hard days, and as a first generation college student. So that's something that I keep
getting busy and forgetting to do, but we've done a little bit, and I want to do more for our church and our students. So
Well, I got one more thing, and this is more symbolic, not literal. I'd send them a pillow as a reminder that they have to take time to rest. God rested on the seventh. He did that for a reason. And, we got to be reminded we got to have moments of rest. And so that would be a symbolic thing for them, just to remember.
you've already given, my Eastern Kentucky twang was coming out in me there, but you've already given, I'm proud of it though, but what's the best advice that you've been given, maybe from a mentor or a pastor friend? What would you say?
The best advice that I was given, and I don't want to get into all the backstory, but it was just like this. It summed up, wherever God's working, that's where you need to move. Because what was going on at the time, not to get into all the details, I was trying to make stuff happen that God wasn't in yet. Then God was doing a work over here. And he reminded me to go after the ones that God's working on, who's ready to respond. And from there, our ministry exploded because we was going where God had already began to work.
Man, I'm thinking of a till, just where ground's already been tilled. It's easier to get a harvest, and that's good stuff, man. After all these years, what keeps you passionate about the work you're doing, my friend?
Seeing souls saved. I mean, that's my number one goal, is to win people to Christ. And, I just seen one saved this past Sunday, going to baptize her in a couple of weeks. That keeps me going right there.
Yeah.
I love it.
When you think about this next generation of pastors, preachers, people going into ministry, what gives you hope?
Gives me hope.
Can you believe you've been in ministry that long now to where you're thinking about that?
No, I can't. It's hard to believe I've been in there that long. What I've been encouraged by, seeing the Bible students at Clear Creek, specifically where I went, because I got a lot of kids that went there, is their dedication to the Word of God. Not inputting their opinion, but they want the truth. And the truth is in the Scripture. So they make their decisions based upon that. They're grounded in that. And as long as the next generation will stay committed to that, the church is going to be fine, because it's the Word of God that changes the hearts and does the work. So
I see passion can be good or bad. Right? You could be passionate about the wrong thing. And I think we see some of that nowadays, not to get too specific, but I think we do see a lot of that positive side of it as well. Like, our youth are passionate, and for them to be passionate and fueled and ready to stand for their beliefs, if it's biblical, then man, that's an encouraging thing to be thinking about. How has maybe your walk with Christ deepened as you've stepped into that lead pastor role?
Well, I've learned to trust him more. You got to trust him more. Doing what I'm doing right now, Joseph, doing this is out of my comfort zone, but I know the Lord wanted me to do it. And so, little things like this each day is just trusting him. When he opens the door, walking through it. And it's just like lifting weights. The more you do it, the stronger you get. And that's something that
I'm learning that painful thing right now as I let myself go and I'm getting my physical health back. I noticed the other day, not lifting weights, but I began to really hit a stride when I was running or jogging. And then I started to actually run, and I was like, dude, I haven't did this. Like, this is scary. And that can be a spiritual thing as well, right? Like, yeah, I was like, this is a little scary. Like, what if I might get hurt? And but same concept. Pastor Dwayne, I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with me today and to invest in our audience. I know quite a few pastors, and God put you specifically on my mind for this, and I do not think he makes mistakes. I know he doesn't make mistakes. And I'll be honest, one of my pastor friends will probably get upset that I didn't go with them for this, but that's okay. Thank you for sharing your heart today. Thank you for sharing some of your calling, the challenges, the joy of ministry. And I think it's given real world healthy perspective to our youth, our young people that are thinking about going into ministry, that are feeling called to go into ministry. So thank you again, my friend. And for anyone watching this and you connected, you enjoyed it today,
do us a favor, like and comment on the video, subscribe to this channel, and share it with a friend. This channel is made to be a resource to our young people, no matter what career they might be wanting to go down, and to glorify God, most importantly. So make sure you help us spread the word. And remember, keep sharing stories, and see you in the next episode.